So I guess this is slightly older news now, as I think that the TSM announcement came out about a week or so before I'm recording this video. But between the major qualifiers and just getting ready for the holidays, I wasn't able to jump on it as soon as the news came out. But now that I had some time and now that we have kind of a lull in activity in CSGO matches, I thought I would address the roster changes that TSM made as they move into 2017 with a new lineup. And of course, the change, if you haven't heard about it for whatever reason, is that Simphis and FNS have been dropped from TSM, and they have picked up Sgares and Shahzam from Echo Fox, and then the three remaining TSM players are going to be long-standing members Sick and Twistzz. Sick has been on the team ever since the original TSM lineup was announced, and Twistzz joined pretty shortly afterwards, like very early in 2016, and then of course Relyks has been on the team ever since Automatic left, which I believe was in August of this year, so he's been with them for the last quarter of 2016, so about 3 or 4 months that he has played with the team. And so that is going to be the lineup going forward for now. And so what I want to do with this video is just talk briefly about like where all these players have come from, like a little touch on what TSM has been through in 2016, and then talking about obviously Echo Fox, since that's where Sgares and Shahzam are coming from, and then just look at this lineup that they have now and kind of try to see if I can kind of assess it a little bit. Now, it's important to note that we obviously haven't seen this team play, right? You know, we haven't seen anything from them at all as a 5. And so all that I can do is, you know, kind of just assess things based on what I know about the players from their history in CSGO and what I've seen recently, and just kind of speculate a little bit based on kind of rumblings that I've heard, or maybe things that I've experienced firsthand or that others have and have relayed to me. And just so it just goes without saying that this isn't a complete assessment of the team. It's kind of just initial reactions, right? Based on some of the news that's come out and some of the things that have been kind of swirling around the community. And so to begin, TSM through 2016 was kind of started off pretty low. They had kind of a good up in summer, and then it kind of dipped back down in recent times. It is really the best way to sum it up. You know, they started off with their original lineup, actually had, of course, Simphis, Finesse, and Sick, as well as Automatic, and their 5th was actually Vice. So they played like 3 online tournaments with Vice as their 5th. I think they lost to Winter Fox in some MLG qualifier thing. I think they lost the DreamHack Malmu qualifiers to Renegades, if I'm not mistaken. I think they also lost the CEVO bracket, because remember CEVO went to like this bracket system for the regular season as opposed to like a weekly match thing. And they lost out in the first bracket there as well, I think to like Selfless. And so after these 3 tournaments, they immediately made a roster lineup to remove Vice, and they were originally trying out a Dren for a little bit, but then he went back to Liquid. And I think he also maybe tried out for Cloud9 for a short time, but went back to Liquid. And then this team winds up picking up Twistzz, you know, this other young player that we're going to talk about in a little bit. And so eventually they started getting some better results online. Like they started doing a little bit better in some of these like iBuyPower Cups. They did really well in Season 1 of ECS, and actually, of course, made it to the finals of ECS on LAN. And they actually placed top 4 at that event, beating Cloud9 and beating Astralis in the best of 1 and playing Fnatic really close. And even played one really close map against Luminosity in the best of 3 that they played in the semifinals of that tournament. So a big 3rd, 4th place finish for them. That was a really big result. And then they had kind of this weird situation, though, with E-League because they couldn't use their full 5 because Twistzz was too young, and so they had to bring in Cadian. And so they didn't do as well results-wise there. That they did play some really close games against some of the top teams in that group, like Fnatic and Dignitas and such. And so there seemed to be a moment in the summer where things were actually starting to really look up for the team. But then, of course, Automatic leaves in August, and he joins Cloud9. Relyks comes in to replace him. And they never really found their footing again after that, it felt like. I mean, they weren't necessarily getting bombed out completely. You know, for example, when they lost the New York qualifier for ESL 1, they lost to Cloud9. When they didn't make it to E-League Season 2, it's because they lost out to Immortal. So they weren't necessarily losing to slouches. But then there were some really big issues. Like when they played iBuyPower Masters and they lost to FaZe and Renegades, they didn't even really look competitive in those games for the most part. And then in ECS Season 2 online, they went 4-14. So that makes them 9th place out of the 10 teams competing in the North American division. So they're actually going to face relegation. They have to, if ECS keeps the same format as before, where like teams go into like the development league and have to promote their way back into ECS. So that's going to be something that they're going to face now because of that. And of course, we know they weren't even in the ESL Pro League because they didn't get voted in way back when Season 4 started. So they've been playing in Premier. I think they might be in the Premier like LAN finals or something to see maybe if they can get promoted in the Pro League. But yeah, so things towards the end of the year started to really dip, right? And so, with that said, it probably goes without saying that change probably was a good thing for this team, given that ever since they lost Automatic and ever since that big run at ECS, things have been kind of going downward a bit. Again, some of their losses weren't necessarily like really that bad because they were losing the top teams, but they weren't gaining any ground is the point. So at the very least, you've hit some type of plateau. You're not really climbing the ladder anymore. And so that's still reason enough to perhaps want to make a change. And so that's what we're seeing happen. Now, when we look at Sgares and Shahzam, who are coming from Echo Fox, just to talk a little bit about Echo Fox, it's a team that didn't do so much, right? It was kind of a failed project, even after countless roster changes that they made, because the original lineup, of course, had like TCK and A2Z and Mo playing on it. Then Shahzam comes in, Roka comes in, Freakazoid comes in. So they even did make some lineup changes, but they still never really accomplished anything, particularly offline. They never really did much. I mean, I think the only things I can think of they did offline were they did well in group play at Northern Arena Toronto, beating out TSM and Optic. And then they actually played a decent series against Immortals in a semifinals matchup, but then got blasted in the third place decider match against Heroic. And then they did win that best of 3 against Flipside Tactics at the iBuyPower Masters that just recently took place, and then played a pretty close series against Tyloo in a BO3. But still, not really very many wins coming out of them on LAN. Like I said, just basically group play at Toronto, and then the one best of 3 against Flipside were like really the only offline results that they had that were wins. And they got kind of straight up embarrassed in E-League Season 2. I mean, I don't even think they won more than like 5 or 6 rounds in the 3 maps that they played or something like that, if I'm not mistaken. So just really, really poor showing there. Just not a lot going for them, basically. Online-wise, I mean, they did upset Liquid to qualify for E-League Season 2. And then in EPL, they were 8th place, 13-13 records. They've certainly maintained their spot in that league, so to speak. But yeah, just there wasn't really much going on in this team. It was kind of a failed project in the sense that, you know, they did bring in this veteran in-game leader, Sgares, and he tried to put something together, but it just didn't really work out. And now we hear information kind of trickling out based on some discussions on particular streams that maybe perhaps Echo Fox wasn't willing to make some of the changes that the team wanted to make to try to excel, like maybe roster changes, for instance, or getting more support staff like analysts and stuff like that. This has kind of trickled out from some of the players talking about things during Rank S and such. And so, yeah, it just seemed like there was some struggles there between the players and the organization about things that they wanted to do to try to turn things around. And who knows if those things would have actually improved the team or not. Obviously, all we can do is speculate. But definitely seemed to be some huge issues there. The project didn't really work out, and so it makes sense that it kind of blew up and that, you know, Sgares and Shahzam have sought other opportunities. But they kind of stuck together as a package deal coming into TSM. And I don't think Sgares will mind me saying this, but when I asked him about this, he really does feel convinced that Shahzam is one of his best options to have as an opper on a team that he's going to play on. He feels that Shahzam's very well-rounded, that when you think about the environment right now of opping in the North American scene, with some of the other top oppers starting to have some of their struggles in recent months, that Shahzam is actually a good option to have as an opper and has a lot of confidence in him, and so they've kind of moved over together into TSM. And that's kind of where we stand. So now let's look at this TSM lineup and kind of assess it a little bit. So first of all, let's talk about Sgares. He's going to be the in-game leader of the team. You know, obviously a veteran leader. He's been around the scene ever since the birth of CSGO, basically, way back when in late 2012 with Area 51. Then he kind of took a break for a while, and that team turned into Quantic, but then came back for the first iteration of Complexity, the one that, of course, made top 4 at the first CSGO major. And stuck with that Complexity group until they went into Cloud9, stuck with that team as well up until, you know, after the summer of 2015, of course, and then, again, was on a break for a while, and then the whole Echo Fox project. Now, of course, he's going to be well known for having some good results for 51 in Complexity. You know, that was some of the best results the NA scene had at the time, you know, throughout those lineups. And of course, that big run from Cloud9 in the summer of 2015 was also some of the best results that NA has had. Obviously, Cloud9 now gone on to win an actual major title at EPL Season 4. And then, of course, we saw what Optic's been doing lately has been really good stuff. And then iBuyPower had a couple of decent results, I think, around 2014, I guess, when they played at the was a Faceit event. I think it was the one in Milan when they had that really crazy series against LDLC on Inferno, and I think they took second at that event, losing to Fnatic in a best of 5, where they won one map. And then I think they played ESWC right afterwards and had like a top 8 finish or something. So there's been some other decent results, but some of the results that Sgares was a part of are some of the best that it has had. Now, I hear kind of two different opinions about Sgares now, it seems like, just listening to the community on Reddit and Twitter and stuff like that. One side still does hold him to very high regard as being one of the best in-game leaders available in the NA scene, and really, praise him for being a great tactician, which I definitely think he is a good tactician. But then there's this other side of people that seem to be thinking now that maybe he's perhaps overrated, maybe his style of calling is outdated. All these different things seem to come up. He relies too much on anti-stratting, doesn't work anymore. Like, I see these opinions all kind of floating around. And I think that a lot of it now is because since Echo Fox didn't really work out, people do question, well, hey, if he was such a great in-game leader, how come he couldn't make Echo Fox work? And maybe one reason why Cloud9 worked is because he had all these super skilled players, and that was really what drove them. And obviously, having skilled players certainly helped Cloud9. That was certainly a part of why they were successful in 2015. But it was also some of Sgares' leadership decisions that helped that team along. He did put a great structure in place. He did really help define some roles by getting Freakazoid as like a dedicated entry fragger. And he made this big move of taking Shroud away from playing peripheral roles and putting him into a secondary entry fragger position. And Shroud, played some of the best CS of his career in that role. And now he's been pushed back to a peripheral role on Cloud9 due to some of the roster changes that happened afterwards. And so you see him struggling a bit. So he's seen to get a little bit more out of his players. And, Skadoodle was playing some of his best CSGO under Sgares. I mean, he was like the second best opera in the world there for a little while behind Guardian. And he was really debating whether he was better than Guardian or not in some people's eyes. And so he did a lot to unlock some players on that team and put a good structure in place. And yes, he was good at countering his opponents, but he was still a good tactician in just a general sense. I think what people fail to understand is that even if you design a tactic to specifically counter another team and what they like to do, that doesn't then mean that that tactic can only be used against that one opponent in that one specific scenario. In the middle of a game, or in the middle of a round against any opponent, if you notice a similarity or you notice an opening in which that specific tactic you designed, X months ago can come into play, like during a timeout or something, you can still recycle that tactic and use it in other scenarios. So this whole thing where it's completely reliant on being an anti-stratter, no, it's about building up your playbook and then recognizing situations where the plays that you've developed over time can work, and based on the personnel you have and different things like that. So no, I think Sgares still has a lot of value as an in-game leader, and I think in a scene where we don't have many established in-game leaders, like certainly Stanislaw has come up on Optic, and certainly Daps is out there as someone that I think has done pretty well. As far as like active players we know that are playing right now, because some are banned and some are still free agents or not playing. Yeah, I think that he certainly is a good leader to have on your team. I think he has been criticized, in some cases rightly so, for having leadership issues, like really like making sure he maintains discipline over his players and not letting people call over him or something like that, which is something I kind of feared if Symphis would have remained on the team, if that leadership dichotomy would have caused an issue or not. As it did, it seemed, at least on the surface from some things we heard from Cloud9 before the summer run. But yeah, no, I think that he is still a very valuable leader. So that's kind of my conclusion on Sgares. I think he has a lot work on his hands, though, now, because he has to develop some young talent. He has to try to keep maybe some egos in check and deal with perhaps, a lot of people who have strong personalities that may clash. He's going to have to deal with that. So he definitely has a task on his hands. It's not going to be easy. But I think that this is a great opportunity for him, because Echo Fox straight up got outskilled most of the time, if we're being 100% honest here. Like, when you stack that 5-man lineup of Echo Fox against like a Cloud9, a Liquid, the Optic lineup, the 2 Brazilian teams, even some of the other North American teams, they were straight up either outskilled by like the big name teams I mentioned, or even in the middle of the pack, they were somewhat outskilled at times, or like evenly skilled. And we're also up against good other in-game leaders like Gabi and Energy and such. So, I mean, you can't fault it too much for that team not working out. You can't pin all the blame on him. to be honest, I don't think they had a strong enough lineup to really do much from the start. And even after the changes, it still seemed like, yeah, they improved a bit, but they still never really got enough consistent firepower to do a lot. So now we'll talk about Shahzam, the opera for this team. Now, again, I already mentioned how Sgares has a lot of confidence in him and mentioned he was like well-rounded with the rifle, thought his opping was quite good. And when you stack that with the current climate of opping in North America, we're really the only oppers we have from North America that are in the pro level of play right now is like Skadoodle and JDM from Cloud9 and Liquid. Sometimes you do have, I guess, Dewey opping for Cloud9, but he's not really a primary opper, so I don't really count him in this conversation. Optic usually Mixwell's a primary opper, again, not from NA, but you do see Tarek or Naf occasionally opping on that team, so I'll mention those names, I suppose. And then you have like Peter from Energy, you have Shahzam, now on TSM from Echo Fox. And that's really the names that you hear tossed around a lot when you think about oppers from North America, right? These Brazilian teams are the, Australians on Renegades, or the Oceanic, the New Zealand / Australian players on Winter Fox, and all that good stuff. When you think about the pro scene, those are some of the big names that come to mind. Nifty maybe from Selfless, I guess is another name you could certainly put in there. And then as far as like younger operas coming up, I don't know very many. I only remember that DSR guy that played at a couple of the minors early this year that had a couple of good games that looked a little bit like maybe he could deserve a chance, and maybe Virtus to a small degree. So I don't really follow Premier that much, or below Premier like Main. So I can't really know like what up and coming operas there are. But the point is that either operas are already locked into other teams and they're having their struggles, it seems, or you have a really small pool to draw from. So given the climate and given the confidence Sean has in Shahzam and the, I guess, how can I put this? Like how well he knows Shahzam. They've played together for a while, so he knows what he's getting. It certainly makes sense to keep Shahzam, I guess, in that sense, given all the factors that are going on. He was one of the stats leaders for Echo Fox a lot of the time when they did have some decent results at times online, and a couple like maps they played that were good offline. One of the guys you could rely on to get numbers from just a pure statistical standpoint, not like looking at an eye test of how he actually played. It is true that I think he is one of the more well-rounded operas in the scene as far as how good his rifle can be. Like, as contrasting it to JDM, for example, you certainly would think that Shahzam's rifle is perhaps going to be better than JDM's, and probably stacks up pretty well against like a Skadoodle or some of the other guys as far as just what he can do with like an AK or M4 in his hands. Because I have seen times where when he doesn't have an op in his hands, he can be even quite assertive and aggressive, and even double as like another kind of just aggressive rifle to have. And so if you do a 5 rifle setup and you mix like Shahzam sick, Twistzz or Relyks, whatever, like just to rush something, he certainly can be assertive with the rifle and help open things up in that sense. I also think Shahzam has come a long way from the Cloud9 days when it comes to his decision making. I think he has gotten better as not re-peaking so much or not taking bad duels as much. Certainly you can always improve on your decision making and how you approach the game, but I think he has looked better over the course of this year in comparison to, remember him playing with C9, which was like the first big team he really played for in CSGO. I also know that one of the issues that kind of came up when he was on Conquest, before he, was booted from that team, before they, right when they, Conquest in the early days of Optic and such, was that he wasn't assertive enough. Like on T sides, he wouldn't be the one to lead a pick. He would almost like just kind of bait his entry fraggers and look for like a follow-up kill with the op. And he would get stuck in a lot of late round situations. And certainly I noticed this, and some of his former teammates have mentioned this. And that is true. I think he has gotten a little bit better in that regard as well, on being more assertive. I think it also just depends on how his endgame leader directs him on what he's going to do a lot of the time. So it just depends on how Sean wants to use him. But yeah, certainly it could be true that because I think he is really assertive when he has an AK in his hands on T side. He seems to be willing to take opening duels and such. But yeah, with the op, he is a bit more conservative. And so I guess it's just about what you want from your opper and how Sean wants to use them, if that's really even an issue or not. I'm not really going to talk about like issues that people have with like his personality or his attitude or things, because that's all stuff I can't really know. That is something to keep an eye on, though, like if he is hot-headed. Like I've heard reports, it's even came out publicly in interviews, I think when like maybe Richard did an interview with Daps at one point when they like he was still on Optic and they had brought in Mixwell and stuff like that. He mentioned that if like players made mistakes, that, you know, Shahzam would be really hard on them, and some players can't handle that. It's good to hold people accountable, but yeah, just depending on who you're doing that to, maybe that causes like a really hostile environment. I don't really know. Again, I'm not there. I don't hear and see these things. You know, I don't know what goes on a daily basis. I can only speculate and just go on things I've heard, but that certainly could be something to kind of be a problem point, something to keep an eye on. So now we'll talk about Sick and Twistzz, the two youth riflers on the team. Sick has been the more impressive one to me. He's 18 years old. He seems to have really good skill. Seems to be a very capable, aggressive rifler. So someone that you can see being like an entry or second entry type player. You know, saw him play a lot of those types of roles on TSM throughout this year. You know, seeing him play like entry roles on mid-array, on Cash, or being like the really big player on the B platform on Cobblestone, or being really a big part of like mid-control on Mirage. And to be fair, TSM did run a lot of like really aggressive 1-4 splits. And so he was very much a part of that group of 4 that were like being aggressive and just rushing and trying to open up a bomb site. So I think that Sick could be, you know, an entry fragger that Shahzam can rely on, or excuse me, that Shahzam and Sgares can rely on. Either him, Twistzz, or Relyks. Like, I think either way, he's going to get a skill upgrade in who his entry fragger is, and perhaps who his second entry fragger is. I think these will be better performing players skill-wise than the entry force he's had before this. So he'll have a little bit better entry players to work with just from a, you know, aiming perspective and fragging output perspective. Because when Sick played in some of these big matches against top competition at E-League and ECS offline in the summer of this year, he did look sharp. He did look impressive. He did put up good numbers. So this could certainly be like a good tool for Shahzam and Sgares to use. Then when it comes to Twistzz, also quite young, 17. Not as impressive as Sick, but I still did see some pretty decent skill from him with rifles. I saw him play like a mix of peripheral roles and like being more assertive on TSM depending on the map. So, for example, on a map like Cobblestone, when they run these really aggressive 1-4 splits, and just in general, when they ran like 1-4 type setups, he would be a part of that mix with Sick kind of being like a combo. But then on some maps, like maybe Cash or maybe even Mirage to a degree, he would kind of play some solo roles. So I could really see the role shaping up on this team where Shahzam and Sgares seems to like to play as an in-game leader from a peripheral role. Like throughout Cloud9 and such, I would always gonna see him play like the edge of a map and call. So that means the other perimeter player is probably either gonna be Twistzz or Relyks, and then, you know, either Twistzz or Relyks will then be paired up with Sick and Shahzam as like the 3-man like control group is how I'd imagine defaults would work on this team, but who knows? So yeah, like Twistzz seems to be a little bit flexible on whether he's gonna be assertive or whether he's gonna be like a solo role player, and so we'll just have to kind of see. Now, I've kind of talked about how Sick and Twistzz seem pretty skilled. They're young. People are talking about grabbing young talent, so it makes sense to have young talent for maybe Shahzam and Sgares to develop and teach. But with them being young, it goes without saying that that means they're a little bit more inexperienced. Maybe their decision-making isn't as good. You know, like maybe they have, you know, like just, you know, immaturity issues to a degree. Like that just goes without saying with anyone who's young, though, those could be things to worry about. I've also heard things just based on what I've seen firsthand at events myself standing behind the team, what I've heard other people say who have stood behind them at tournaments, what you've seen kind of rumbling on streams, like between different pro players on Rank S. Like I remember there's this one conversation with Automatic and Finesse recently that comes to mind, where you kind of wonder if some of these players do have issues with ego or tilting or some type of hot-headed attitudes, which when you juxtapose that against like a Shahzam who has been sometimes said that he can be really hard on teammates when they're making mistakes, you wonder if this is going to like flare up into some potential like real problem areas. It just depends on how they mature and how they develop under Shahzam and Sgares, whether or not some of these things will fix themselves as they gain more experience and learn how to play under Shahzam and Sgares' system. But yeah, I mean, I just seemed like you heard kind of rumblings about some of these players having some of those issues at times, and so I just hope it doesn't blow up like in practice or and causes issues. Like I said, I have no idea. I'm not there on the daily basis. I don't know what goes on. I can only go off of things I've heard from other players and other talent and just other people that I know in the scene that have spoken with them or been behind them at events or what have you. So yeah, like that's just like I said, it's not like a major problem, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on, I guess is the best way I can put it. And then last but not least, we have Relyks, who I think really came alive for Selfless, like at E-League and some of the final online play he had with that team. Saw him on a lot of lurk roles for Selfless, and then on TSM, in many cases, he just kind of filled Automatic's old slots, which meant he would kind of lurk like by himself on Cobble or maybe outside B on Overpass or different things like that. But then I did see him in more aggressive roles at times too, like on Mirage, where maybe like Twistzz would take, a more kind of lurk role. Even sometimes Sick would. So it seemed like the roles kind of got jumbled towards the end. So yeah, I'm not sure how Relyks will get used here. Like I said, I know he played a lot of peripheral roles on Selfless, and he became kind of the main player for that team after some of the other guys like Kusta and stuff left. But talking to Ryu, he told me that he thinks Relyks would be a better entry fragger just because of his style of play and his aim. And again, I think this is certainly a possibility. Like I said, I could really see this team shaping up with like Sean playing one end of the map, either Twistzz or Relyks playing the other end, and then whichever one of Twistzz and Relyks is not on one end of the map, they would pair up with Sick and Shahzam to try to be like a control group. So we'll just have to see how they decide it works out and how it plays out. But I think you have a lot of youth on this team, particularly Sick and Twistzz, but Relyks is also pretty young. Depending on how these youth develop will be the heartbeat of this team and determine how successful it is. If Sean Sgares can figure out a way to get past maybe some of the problem areas some of these players might have, develop them well, teach them how to play the system that he wants to play, make sure that they can actually do that effectively. There is some decent skill on this team between like a Sick and a Twistzz rifling, and Shahzam's op is not bad, especially given the current climate of opping. I think he's pretty well-rounded as well. I somewhat side with Sean Sgares' own confidence in him. But like I said, some problem areas certainly seem to be like youth, inexperience, potential ego, potential like strong personalities clashing. Like there's definitely some things that you have to be somewhat concerned with. But my final thoughts on this team is I think that they certainly won't. I don't think they can really challenge like Optic for a top spot. I don't know what Liquid's gonna look like at the major and what they'll look like going forward. Cloud9 certainly had their problems, but they're still a really skilled lineup. Depends on how they sort themselves out. Then of course you had the two Brazilian teams in NA. So the point is they're probably not going to hit top 5 playing in the North American region, but I certainly could see them being like 6th or 7th starting out. Like that's kind of where I see their level of play. Like just initially when they start having some of their first official games. But I think I feel like Optic's pretty well solidified. I think once SK gets their roster situated, they'll be pretty solidified. I think Immortals will still be strong. So the Optic SK Immortals will probably always be I think we'll be in the top 3 for some time. But I think depending on like what happens with Liquid and Cloud9, maybe this team could like if everything works out great, everything goes perfect, so to speak, and you really see this team mold and develop and gel well together. If Cloud9 and Team Liquid continue to have their struggles, there is a chance that this lineup could perhaps challenge them a little bit, like for like playoff qualifications and things like that. Don't really know, though. I think that's like best case scenario. There is this scenario where this team doesn't work out and they have to make more changes to get it right as well. That's obviously like worst case scenario. So yeah, these are just initial thoughts and reactions. Like I said, never seen them play together before, so can't really know until you see them play. Maybe I'll assess them in the future after we see them play a few tournaments. And like I said, a lot of this is just based on rumblings and things that I've heard, and maybe those things aren't even accurate. So I can only really speculate about some of the problem areas they might have. But yeah, I think this is a decent lineup given the scenario that they had. I think it would have been neat to see them get like another really big name rifler in somehow. Not big name rifler, but like another up and coming rifler. Like I would have loved to see like a Breezy on this TSM team in place of someone. Not sure who I'd replace to get Breezy in, if it'd be like Twistzz or Relyks, since those are, I'm really set on having Sick. I don't know, like that might have been neat. Maybe they could have like made a move like that maybe would have made them even stronger in their rifling positions. Because I think obviously Energy did wind up getting Breezy, so he's still going to be on another team. But yeah, I don't know if there might have been like another more promising rifler they could have gotten that maybe like, because I've heard like really good things about Breezy as far as like his communications and being a teammate. And so if you did have some like hotheads on this team, maybe having someone come in that isn't a hothead, that is known for being like a good teammate and communicator, maybe that would have lightened up the mood a bit. I don't know. Anyway, that's just kind of my initial thoughts. I think this team will be pretty decent, but we'll just have to see over time how far they can actually go. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Thanks so much for tuning in. Please follow, subscribe for more content.